Hey there, kiddos, and welcome to your PowerPoint presentation on terrestrial biomes. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 that you need to know. So you are going to be filling out a grid on page 9 of your notes, and you're going to be tackling everything there except for the harmful human activity. So we will do that together in class. Now I'm going to be adding a lot of little extra stuff. You may choose to take additional notes besides what there's room for there. You may choose just to listen, but I would listen to what I have to say as opposed to just writing down what's on the PowerPoints, because remember, although there aren't a whole lot of specific questions on the national exam on biomes, these are the background basically for everything else we're going to talk about. So if somebody is referring to the chaparral, you should be like, oh yeah, okay, that's the really rare climate that is very mild, but they are opportunities for fires and floods. Got it. So this is almost like a vocabulary exercise, really. So let's go ahead and get started because we do have a lot of material to get through. Remember, this is a video, so you can stop anytime you like. And just stop and take notes and reassess. These PowerPoints are also on our Canvas site, so you can take a look at them there as well. Okay, this is not in your notes, but I want to just kind of explain some terms that I'm going to be using. We are going to talk about weather in another unit, but I want for you to understand the difference between climate and weather. When we refer to climate, we mean the average atmospheric conditions in an area over a long period of time. Now, you need to make note of this to yourself somewhere on, well, actually, it's already there on your grid. Temperature and precipitation, rain, and how warm or cold it is, those are the two most important factors in a region's climate. Why? Because those are the two things that determine what kind of plants can grow, which then sets the tone for the rest of the ecosystem. So know that, temperature and precipitation. Weather is just what's going on today. So Mark Twain had a really great saying, which is, climate is what we expect and weather is what we get. So, through hundreds and hundreds of years, we pretty much know what the climate is going to be like. Like, it's going to rain at 3 o'clock every afternoon during the rainy season here in Florida. But then there are days it doesn't rain. Okay, it's dry. That rainy season, that's climate. The fact that we did not get rain on a particular day, that's weather. Okay. So you're also going to be learning about things called convection cells. This kind of brings me to this globe. If you need to draw a short, a little circle with some lines on it, I would. You don't need to know the names of these cells yet. Don't worry about it. You will learn those later. Don't write them down right now. But do note how you measure where you are in the globe. The middle part of our globe, the fattest part of the waist of the Earth, is called the equator. Then what you do is you measure a fixed distance called a degree from the equator towards either the North Pole or the South Pole. There are 90 degrees between the equator and the top of the planet. So you should be familiar with 30, 60, and then 90. These 30-degree lines have a specific name. We will get to that in a second. So on your little drawing of wherever you can shove it in your notes, do so, either a separate piece of paper that you staple on or the back of the notes or whatever. Okay, so why am I telling you about these things if we haven't talked about them yet? Because there are these 6, again, convection cells. They're kind of like tubes of wind that go around the world. And it just so happens that where they meet tells us where you find different types of biomes. So just kind of keep in mind that there are some weather patterns, climate patterns that determine where things are. Okay, you need to be familiar again with the idea of latitude. I have already explained that. And then you also need to be able to understand the concept of altitude. All the things that we're talking about in terms of where biomes are on the globe are the same as where you would find them on a mountain. And altitude is how high you go up the mountain. So as latitude and altitude increase, biomes and vegetation change. So take a look at this. As you move from the equator to the North Pole, you can literally predict what kind of biome you're going to see. And a biome is just an area that has a similar composition of plants and animals. You'll see what I mean as we talk about them. Turns out that the trend that you see from the equator to the pole is literally the same that you see as you change your altitude on a mountain. So you can see here you go from the tropical rainforest to the tundra, same deal on the globe. So be aware that the trends that we see from the equator to the poles are the same ones that you would see up a mountain. Same thing here. Same thing here. Okay, so these are all of the different biomes on the planet. You are not going to need to know all of them. There are some particular ones like the alpine area, the specific different kinds of deserts. There's something called a tropical deciduous forest, which you're not going to need to know about. But if you look, the reason this is kind of cool is that where you find this stuff is pretty predictable. The equator is right about here. So right here, kind of at the top of Brazil. You can see that the space that you go from the equator to here is right around the same amount of space as you go from the equator to here. And look, same biome. So again, it allows us to predict where we find things. And when we're talking about environmental science, which will eventually get to use of resources and conservation, it's kind of important to know where you can find stuff. This graphic may help you at the very end of this kind of organize which biomes are wet, which ones are dry, which ones are hot, which ones are cold. Again, remember temperature and precipitation tell you where you find stuff. So as you're trying to make sense of these biomes, you may want to start organizing them into these different groups so you can say how they're similar and how they're different. What I just said are the kind of things that you can be expected to do on free response questions. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and talk about forests. One of the things to keep in the back of your head is that fire is actually an important part of all of the types of forests that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about specifically about fire in a future unit. But as you're looking at all of these places, we've been conditioned to think fire is bad. Too big of a fire is bad. Fire is actually not only good, but necessary for some of these ecosystems. Okay, so we're going to start with the taiga or the boreal forest. So looking at your grid, location and distribution, you find it at 50 or 60 degrees north of the equator. That's what that means right there. It's cold and wet. The wet is actually kind of specifically snow. Make a note to yourself that snow doesn't really count as water because it is not available to plants. So it's both wet and I guess kind of dry. And then a medium productivity. A goodish amount of plants up there, but you're going to see the variety is actually pretty low. Okay, so in terms of biota, plants, and animals, here's what I would do is I would pick one thing to remember and then just remember that. So here's a bunch of different kinds of trees. Most of the trees you find are called conifers or evergreens. They do not drop their leaves. That is just an evolutionary thing. Their leaves are covered with a waxy coating so that they can conserve water. You're also going to notice that they're all roughly triangular in shape, and that's so they can shed the snow. If you look at the trees that we have here in Southwest Florida, these oak trees that have these big spreading branches, if it were to snow on them, they would crack in half because they'd catch all the snow and just kind of fall over. They can live through the long winter drought because snow is not a viable source of water. Evergreens and conifers, when I say do not drop their leaves, they drop leaves. I mean, stuff dies, right? But they don't drop their leaves in the way that like this aspen tree would in the winter time. Okay, they only drop them occasionally. You need to know that the soil quality there and jam this in somewhere with relative productivity. By the way, that's what that means is like how many plants grow there. Please write down that the soil quality is poor because there's not a lot of decomp that goes on there. First, because trees aren't dropping their leaves, and then second, it's too cold for bacteria to do what they do very quickly. And then the soil there is also very acidic because the conifer leaves, when they do drop, are full, they're acidic, and they basically do something called allelopathy, and here's what that means. Only conifer trees can grow in acidic soil, so by having acidic leaves that drop and make the soil around them acidic, they basically poison the soil so nothing else can grow there. So that's why when you see these conifers like this, you're going to notice nothing really grows around them. You actually see that here in Southwest Florida around pine trees, same idea. Okay, so there's a lot to take in there. Figure out where you can jam it into your notes. Different types of animals. They cope with winter temperatures. You may want to put somewhere in there where it says biota. You may want to note some of the adaptations that they use to survive. And here it's fur. You can see that this particular snowshoe rabbit. You know what I was thinking, or I was reading about before this, not horseshoe crab, sorry, that's a snowshoe rabbit. Its fur actually changes color depending on the season, and you can see why. It's a very good adaptation to have. Some animals just sleep through the winter, that's how they deal. Some of them actually literally leave, that they migrate out, or they have burrows underground. Okay, so here are some different types of animals. You can write down a couple of them. I always like to have this one with the lady here. She's probably about 5'3" or 5'4". Moose are gigantic. They're really huge and really scary up close and in person. Elk are the same way. So here you can see a lynx. This is what I was talking about before. It's super cute. Anyway, so pick a couple animals to know and know them. All right, so temperate deciduous forests are found 30 or 40 degrees north of the equator. It's warm and moderately rainy and high productivity. So lots and lots of plants, which means you have lots and lots of different animals there. These trees are deciduous. What does that mean? Deciduous means that they drop their leaves in winter, and I'm specifically talking about the trees, and they become dormant. So dormant is what we call plants when they hibernate. Be aware of other adaptations of this type of tree in terms of its leaves are broad, so it can catch a lot of sunlight. They're actually edible. That's why they can support a lot of plants and animals. Those pine trees, the leaves are not very edible. There are seasons here. This is where you have fall, winter, spring, and summer. If you're like, gosh, you're going so fast, how are you remembering, how am I supposed to remember all this stuff? There are parts of your textbook that you can read as well to kind of help get this all in your brain. If deciduous trees drop their leaves in winter, what happens to the overall concentration of carbon dioxide in the air? Well, photosynthesis is where you take in carbon dioxide to make oxygen, and if trees shut down for the winter, that means they're no longer producing oxygen. So this is going to become important when we talk about climate change. There is a spike in carbon dioxide levels every winter in North America, and it's because the trees that are partially responsible for absorbing that carbon dioxide, they shut down for the wintertime, which is why you've got this jagged up and down. You're going to notice, overall, you've got an overall trend up this way, but why is this going up here and then going down here? We'll kind of estimate where the months are. These are the winter months. These are the summer months. These are the summer months and these are the winter months. It would help if I actually paid attention. This is carbon dioxide levels. So anyway, so up and down, up and down, up and down. All right, so side note, do you need to know that right now? No, I'm just kind of introducing this ahead of time. All right, these are different types of animals you can see there, all sorts of different ones. You often have migratory birds in the summer. Okay, tropical rainforest is found pretty much right at the equator. It's hot and wet, very high productivity. This is something you may want to sketch out, is you need to know the layers of the forest. You have an emergent layer, a canopy layer, understory, shrub, forest floor. Don't worry about subterranean, that's underground, nobody cares. It is actually kind of dark here because 99% of this light is captured by the canopy. Most of the greenery is up here, so it's always kind of like this twilight. Although it's sunny all the time, you would never know it down here because the tops of the trees grow together so thickly. Again, do make sure you sketch that. You should know the different layers of the forest. These are different types of plants. Here you can see a mahogany tree. It kind of gets larger towards the base. That's called a buttress. Not something that you necessarily going to be tested on, but I'm just throwing vocab at you just in case. This orchid is called an epiphyte. That is a plant that gets its nutrients out of the air as opposed to out of soil. This is actually and we'll talk about this later, this is a commensalistic relationship. It's not hurting the tree. It's just using the tree for support, and the tree barely knows it's there. You need to know this. Soil quality is poor because nutrients are quickly taken up by the plants. So it's kind of like a conundrum in your brain is like, how can you have high productivity but have no nutrients in the soil? It's because it's so warm here and there's so much moisture available that the second something hits the ground, it's decayed in no time at all, and the plants immediately take up those nutrients. So there's not a lot left in the soil. And then here are all the different kinds of animals that are there. Arboreal, by the way, means that spider monkeys very rarely come down out of the trees. Arboreal, an arbor, is referring to a tree, so arboreal means that they spend most of their life in the trees. As you're taking in all these details, it seems like a lot. Remember one plant and one animal from each of these biomes so you can use them as an example on the national exam. You're not going to have to remember like all of them. Okay, temperate rainforests are only found, it's one of the rarer biomes. So they're always on the coast. They're always at mid-latitude, so kind of 40, 50, 60 degrees. Warm, wet climate, which makes sense because we're right next to the ocean. Medium to high productivity. So really note where these are specifically. I did include a blank world map, so if you are not aware of, hey, this is Spain, you need to write down and know where all of the different, not only continents, but countries are. Okay, so if you're like, I don't know what that is, look it up. I don't know where this is. Well, this is part of this is the top of, hold on one second, my brain is not working right now. Part of this goes into Canada, and so that's part of the northern Washington also is up there. So get a look at a map and know where this stuff is. Okay, these are all different types of plants and animals that you can see there. Really all that you need to know about this is that it's kind of unusual because it's this warm and wet area, basically getting up close to the boreal forest. Why are these warm when it's next to such colder areas? Well, we're going to learn about that later. So not a whole lot to know about this particular area. Okay, deserts. Deserts are usually found at 30 degrees north and south of the equator. So the equator is right here. They're found up here and down here. You need to know that the Tropic of Cancer is what we call the 30-degree line up here in the northern hemisphere, and the Tropic of Capricorn is what we call the 30-degree line in the southern hemisphere. So go back to your globe and label those. You don't need to know this, just realize that there are weird places that deserts end up that we will explain later. There are 3 kinds. You only have like really space for one. Usually when they're talking about deserts, they mean the hot desert, but I just really want you to know that you should know that there are 3 kinds. Hot, temperate means warm, but not like horrible. And then, believe it or not, there are deserts that have snow in the ground. What is the characteristic of all of these is they're all uniformly dry. They get next to no rain. Okay, so when you talk about climate, they can be hot, temperate, or cold, but next to no rain. Rain is measured in millimeters for the entire year. Okay, so Sahara Desert's a great example of a hot desert, northern part of Africa, and looks like this. There's not a lot going on. Wildly fluctuating temperatures. It can get 110, 120 degrees out there during the day, and then it can plunge down into the 40s and 50s at night. So the animals that live there have to be very hardy. They have to be able to deal with a lot of stuff. And how do they deal with a lot of stuff? They usually end up digging little burrows. Temperate deserts you usually found a lot of these in the United States. And then the cold desert, the one to know is the Gobi Desert. And look, there are camels there, because it turns out that camels started out life as a cold weather organism. The very things that make it possible for them to survive in the cold also make it possible for them to survive in the hot. Desert plants are what are called succulents. They store water in their cells or moisture in their cells, and then they have it's called a pellicle. Not that you need to know that, but they have a waxy coating on the outside. That means they have low evaporation. They're able to uptake water very quickly when it does fall and then store it, as you can see. And then they perform photosynthesis basically all over their stems. Their leaves are modified into spikes in some cases to protect them. These are different types of animals. The fennec fox to me is probably one of the cutest animals on the planet. That drawing does not do it justice. Google it right now and you will see how cute it is. So how do organisms deal with the heat? Well, you're going to notice that they have long limbs, long ears to allow their blood to circulate and heat to be given off. In some cases, they go what's called, they go dormant. So it's almost like hibernation in the winter, same idea. They kind of go into this stasis mode if it is just during the actual summertime months, it's too hot. Some of them only come out at night when it's cooler. So yeah, and then scales, super helpful because they help to prevent evaporation of moisture. Okay, this is not in your notes. I just wanted to let you know the next thing we're going to talk about are grasslands, which are made of mostly, you guessed it, grass. The cold grassland, or what's called the steppe, is not in there. Because I'm going to be talking about short grass, medium grass, and tall grass. This is what I mean by short grass. It's the steppe of Central Asia. I'm just going to breeze through this briefly. Don't feel the need to take notes. It is a transition between the desert and grasslands. Really the only difference is how much rain it gets. That's really it. So really, really short grass. This is where you'll see tumbleweeds that utilize wind for propagation. This is actually really cool. This is what a tumbleweed looks like. And then it flowers, and then when it makes its seeds, it dries up. The stem part and the root part survive for another season, but then this part breaks off. And then this is super cool. The reason tumbleweeds tumble is that all of the seeds are inside this thing, so as it tumbles, it just scatters its seeds everywhere. So that's actually how it spreads itself, is it has an adaptation where it can make sure that its future generations are in a lot wider area. Another useless fact for you to know. And then these are steppe animals. You've probably seen this before. This is called a Taiga antelope. They are going through a lot of problems. We will probably talk about him again. I just like him because he's got this funky nose. The reason for this is it's a very dusty area, and that helps to filter out a lot of the dust before it gets to their lungs. Okay, back to your actual little grid of notes. Temperate grassland, which is also called the prairie, you largely see in North America. It's at 30 or 40 degrees north. More moderately rainy climate, medium productivity. The plants there are medium height. What do I mean by that? They usually grow no higher than your waist. Fire is an incredibly important part of this biome. You may want to make a short note of that. This biome, and also make a note of this, underneath where it says moderate productivity, this biome is used for agriculture in the United States because the soil is very rich, and I'm going to show you why the soil is super rich. I mean, if you look at here, this is where all the corn and potatoes grow because that is where the prairie is. We've dug all this up, and it's now farmland. So prairie plants have what are called rhizomes. So most of the living plant is connected and it's underneath the soil. So if this is the soil line, these are the rhizomes. And then the parts that perform photosynthesis poke out. And you're like, great, Morris, who cares? Because fire is a very important part of this ecosystem. It's supposed to catch on fire, and when it does, the stuff that's left behind is ash, and it is now in a form that the rhizomes can then use as nutrition again. So the soil is very rich, and these roots are so thick that it's kept the rich soil in place. So that's why we grow our crops there. Different types of prairie animals. Pick one. Okay, so the savanna is found in transition areas between hot deserts and forests. So largely think about Africa. That's the best place to think about it. dramatic wet and dry seasons. That's one of the things that drives migration of the large animals that live there. You may want to make a note, large animals, they move to find water, basically. So here, where let me go back a second. Sorry, I hope this is not making you like your eyes crazy. Where the prairie and the steppe pretty much don't have trees, so you may want to make a note of that. In the temperate grassland, you don't have trees. The savanna will have a few trees. Like there's one here and then there's one there. That's where you see I never say this right, the baobab tree, and the acacia tree. But mostly it's grass that is tall, and by tall I mean elephant grass is literally as tall as an elephant. An elephant can hide in there. So, also something else to think is the fact that they can support an occasional tree and really tall grass tells you that it is going to be, although it says medium productivity, its productivity is going to be higher than the prairie. Okay, so here are a bunch of different types of savanna animals. Make note of the fact that the reason all of these animals can exist in the same place, we'll talk about this a little bit later, is because there's a vertical feeding pattern. So these trees are designed, rhinos will eat the stuff that they can get to, giraffe eat the stuff that they can get to, which means that tree can serve multiple different species. Again, please keep in mind that those dramatically different wet and dry seasons force large herbivores and then their predators to migrate from place to place to find water, and then also plants, because obviously if there's no water, plants aren't going to grow. So do make note of the migratory patterns of the large animals there. Large herbivores and large predators live here. Herbivores are things that eat plants, so giraffes, rhinos, elephants, this is where you find them, but then this is also where you find lions and cheetahs, stuff like that. Okay, the tundra is found in what's called the Arctic Circle, which is the area north of 60 degrees. This is beyond the boreal forest. It is cold, it is dry. It is a very brief but fertile summer with really long days that make the tundra a destination for breeding birds because, not that you need to know this, but baby birds grow as fast as you can feed them. So if you can take them to an area where you have almost continual sunlight and then also almost continual access to things like bugs, you can get them out of the nest super quick. But overall, throughout the year, you want to make a note, although they have this brief but fertile summer, overall that it's low productivity. And again, when we're talking about productivity, we mean plant productivity. So here's a question. Why aren't there any Antarctic tundra biomes? Well, it's just simply a matter of that land does not exist. If you were to take, again, north of 60, which is right here, oh look, there's no land. There can't be tundra in the the southern hemisphere because there's literally no land to have it on. Look at how dramatically different these tundra plants are to the savanna plants. They are very, very short grasses, even shorter than the steppe, lichen and moss. Note the lack of trees and the shortness of the vegetation. This is because of permafrost. You're going to want to make a note of this somewhere in there. Permafrost is about 6 inches under the soil, and it is a frozen layer of the soil. And so trees can't grow there because they can't get their roots down far enough to be able to support themselves. They would just fall over. So only little guys can grow. And these are some animals that that are there. Most animals survive the very, very cold conditions there by just migrating. They just stay later, and they're not there when it's really, really bad. Very few animals can survive winters in the tundra. Okay, shrubland, or otherwise called the chaparral, is the rarest biome on the planet, which means they will ask you a question about it on the national exam. Note the specific locations. So you're going to want to write this down. Argentina, California, and then right around the Mediterranean Sea. If you don't know that's the Mediterranean Sea, please go to the map that I've included on page... hold on a second. Turning pages while I am talking to you. It is on page... Well, I did put it further. Page 17. I have a blank map for you where you can label with stuff to your heart's content. So make note of those areas. Okay, so plants and animals of the chaparral. These are the different things you can find there. Here are the important features that you need to know. Okay, first of all, hot, dry summers, mild, rainy winters. You need to start thinking about the consequences of this stuff. If you have hot, dry summers, it means that you are going to have fires. Mild, rainy winters mean that you can have flooding and landslides. Now, people still like to live here because the climate is just so nice. You have most of your days are good days. If you can put up with a little bit of fire and a little bit of flooding, you're in good shape. Okay, so that is the end of the biomes. The couple of things that I'm going to talk about right now are just kind of fun facts. It's hard for me to tell under your masks, but some of you seem to actually be kind of interested in this stuff. So this won't be tested, but it's just to kind of explain some of the differences that you've seen in the animals that you've looked at. Okay, there's something called Allen's rule, which is that appendages lengthen with an approach to the equator. Especially look at the ears here. This is the snowshoe hare, little short ears, and then this is a desert hare, long ears. Why? Because these long ears allow for blood flow, which means that you can get rid of heat quickly. Here, you want to conserve heat, so you're going to be a little bit more stumpy. Bergman's rule is that bulk, an animal gets bigger and fatter with its approach to the poles. These are the black bears that we have here in Florida. You're going to notice they look pretty scrawny. That's just kind of the way. They don't need to be fat, because think about it, they can, like, there's food sources everywhere. Polar bears, on the other hand, are going to be very, very round, because when they eat, they have to eat well, because they don't know when they're going to eat again. Now notice, notice this is also following Allen's rule. Look at the ears on this guy versus the ears on this guy. And then lastly, what we're going to do in class is you're going to learn how to read climatograms and understand how these relate to different biomes. It's a graph, but it's two graphs on the same thing. There are a bar graph and a line graph. The line graph is always temperature. Here it's measured in degrees Fahrenheit. You're usually going to see degrees Celsius, so you're going to have to get comfortable in your head going between the two types of things. And then here, this is precipitation. So that's how much it rains in each month. So when you look at this, you're going to notice that you've got, the temperature is pretty constant, but then here you have a dramatic change. You have a wet season and a dry season. So if it's pretty mild, which it is, in a wet season and a dry season, this is probably a chaparral. So you're going to be able to take a graph and then tell me what biome it comes from, but that'll come later. I just wanted to introduce that to you. As a matter of fact, in your packet, you've got some climatographs or climatograms that we're going to work through. That is the end of this rather long video on biomes. So there are associated readings with this, but hopefully that gives you most of the information that you need to know.